Going nuclear, is it the answer to the world's carbon problems or a catastrophe in the making? Also on today's program, the battle for Mosul. Can Iraq finally take back the Daesh stronghold? And in Picture This, a total eclipse of the sun. Parts of Asia are plunged into daytime darkness. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. It's green, it's reliable, and for years many have claimed it is the future of our energy needs. But nuclear power has an image problem. 5 years ago it was Fukushima, 30 years ago it was Chernobyl. And today the prospect of radioactive material falling into the hands of insurgents means that the word nuclear is tainted for many. Several countries in Europe have tried to phase out nuclear power and turn towards wind and solar. But despite its image problems in the West, emerging economies are turning to nuclear power in their droves. China in particular is building dozens of new plants around the world. And proponents of nuclear say it's cheap, it's clean, and these days completely safe. Today's Newsmaker is nuclear power, as we ask if it's the energy of the future or a relic of the past.
It's powerful and can be destructive. But it's clean and could help keep our planet's carbon emissions in check. The battle over the future of nuclear power is risk versus reward, and countries are now faced with a choice. At the root of it all is cost. Falling oil prices and cheap shale gas have put pressure on the industry. But some countries believe spending billions on new plants will work out cheaper than importing fuel. As the world figures out its energy future, the role of nuclear power remains unclear. Today, there are over 430 nuclear reactors in over 30 countries. They meet 10% of the world's energy demand, but that could grow. The International Energy Agency projects a 60% leap in nuclear activity by 2040, with almost half of that growth coming from China. But then some countries, like Germany and France, are phasing nuclear energy out.
The moment we're going for a new system.
The nuclear industry is one of the most highly regulated in the world, but things have gone very wrong before. A meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania sparked mass evacuations and rung alarm bells about nuclear safety. When Ukraine's plant in Chernobyl exploded, it released a radioactive cloud over Europe. The site is still uninhabitable. And just 5 years ago, a powerful earthquake and tsunami near Japan caused a meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi. The spread of radiation is still being tackled. But the Japanese government is adamant that the country's future is nuclear.
Majority of Japan is against the nuclear power. But the Japanese know very well that we need energy for economy, for life. And I think this opinion will change.
But nuclear isn't forever, and hundreds of existing plants may have to be decommissioned by 2040. There's the added complication of waste disposal, which in itself is highly dangerous. There's a post-9/11 fear that nuclear power used by terrorists and criminals could lead to unthinkable consequences. For years, activists in France have broken into nuclear stations to prove it can be done. Reports suggest the US government did it in Iran.
CIA managed to smuggle in a computer virus into the control systems of those centrifuge plants that destroyed them. So things happen out there.
For now, atomic weapons remain under the control of governments. But the UN has warned of the dangers of nuclear material falling into the wrong hands. However positive nuclear energy may be for our future, its capability for destruction will remain a sticking point. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the future of nuclear power from Washington, D.C. is radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, Kevin Camps. And here in the studio is nuclear energy trade lawyer Alina Teplinsky. Thanks both of you for joining us. Alina, let's start with you. You believe that nuclear is still one of our best bets for clean, safe energy. Why?
It's actually even a better bet today than it was previously. Nuclear power has been an option for more than 50 years. And through those 50 years, we have a lot of lessons learned about safe and reliable operation. In this past December, on the Paris Climate Change Accords, 195 countries decided to set a goal of reducing climate change to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. In order to do that, you need to have a good mix of clean energy sources. What are our options? It's nuclear power, it's renewables, and it's perhaps natural gas. Renewables is a great option, but renewables are intermittent. They function at about 30% of capacity. Nuclear power can function about 90% of capacity. And natural gas is also a good option, but you need to have the pipeline to support it. So you have to have a mix of all of them. And nuclear is the only clean energy source that can provide energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay, Kevin, it's an invaluable part of the mix. It's safe, it's clean, and it doesn't screw up the environment. What do you think?
Well, that's not true. I mean, energy reliability from nuclear, look at Japan. So we're 5 years post-Fukushima. The Japanese nuclear power industry has been largely shut down that entire time. So it's not 24/7, 90% efficiency and reliability. It's not a solution to the climate crisis. Nuclear weapons proliferation risks, the unsolved radioactive waste problem, the risks of catastrophes like Chernobyl and Fukushima, routine radiation releases at every stage of the nuclear fuel chain. This is not a solution. Renewables and efficiency are the future, if we're going to have a future, and nuclear is in rapid decline.
Alina, too many risks.
The risks are certainly there. We always say in the nuclear industry that the risks are high consequence, but they're very low probability. So some of these risks are greatly exaggerated also because people have this fear of radiation. Radiation is invisible. You can't see it. It's not like an oil spill where people can see the consequence. So people are afraid of what they don't know. In fact, there are more than 60 reactors under construction right now. The reactors that are being decommissioned in the US that Kevin mentioned, they're actually not being decommissioned because they're old. It's because of the energy prices. Liquid natural gas in the United States is very cheap. And some of the CEOs of the energy companies, when looking at single unit plants that are maybe not profitable tomorrow, but maybe profitable in 10 years, have made a decision that it's economically not the best bet to continue to operate those plants. So they haven't been shut down because of safety concerns. And especially for developing nations such as China, I'm sorry if I can just finish.
Okay, just finish your point.
Yeah, if for developing nations such as China, they need baseload energy. It is impossible to meet energy demands that countries like China have, or even here in Turkey with renewables energy, because there's no storage capability for that.
Okay. Kevin?
Well, that makes my point for me that nuclear power cannot compete. It is astronomically expensive. If you look at, the proposed flagship of the Western nuclear renaissance in Finland, Olkiluoto, the French Areva Nuclear Corporation was building that. It didn't take 4 years to construct. It's now close to 10 years with no end in sight. And the cost overruns are a doubling or a tripling of the price tag. It can't solve the climate crisis if it's so astronomically expensive, if it takes so long to build new atomic reactors. And in Turkey, with the new reactor proposals, I mean, earthquake risks in the north, the companies involved from places like Japan, which is still reeling from Fukushima. I mean, the low likelihood of a catastrophe. What was Fukushima? 1 in a million chance per year of a reactor meltdown. They had 3 meltdowns in a few days.
Let me bring up the point with Alina again. Fukushima, it wasn't just this rare incident.
In fact, it was.
It's damn scary.
In fact, it was. It was an unprecedented earthquake and an unprecedented tsunami that was well beyond the design basis of the plant. It's something that nobody planned. Despite that, the industry worldwide, not just in Japan, but also in the United States, in Europe, in China, took away some lessons learned from Fukushima. So one of the issues was the plant was actually not damaged by the earthquake. What was damaging was a tsunami, which cut off offsite power, and it flooded the emergency diesel generators to provide the backup power. So after that, the industry took away the lesson. Let's have more backup power.
And Alina, to Kevin's earlier point about weapons proliferation. Kevin, I'll bring you in just a second. About weapons proliferation, I mean, we know with nuclear energy, once you pass a certain threshold, it's easy to weaponize nuclear energy. We've seen many countries, 8 countries by my count, have nuclear weapons. Are you not concerned about rogue actors with nukes in their arsenal, Alina?
Actually, you have to separate the two. Nuclear power and nuclear weapons are two different things. Nuclear weapons can only be created when you have enrichment and reprocessing capabilities. Very few countries in the world have those capabilities, and those are countries that have, for the most part, nuclear weapons. Nuclear power, you could just go into a nuclear power plant and grab a rod and create a weapon.
It makes it easier to develop weapons once you have nuclear capability, doesn't it?
Not if you don't have enrichment and reprocessing capabilities. That was actually the whole issue with Iran. The concern was that they're developing enrichment capabilities which can be used for peaceful end use, but if you escalate up to a certain level, you can use those for weapons. So this is actually an international movement that countries that are developing nuclear energy now, such as Turkey in the UAE, they're not looking to pursue enrichment and reprocessing because they can get their fuel elsewhere.
Okay, Kevin, there are rigid checks and balances built into this system, and you have to separate it out between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Alina trusts that system. You do not. Why?
It's not true. I mean, whether it's Joe Cirincione at the Plowshares Fund or Mohammed El-Baradei at the IAEA, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, warning that the reason that countries in the Middle East, for example, are interested in nuclear power is to have an option to develop nuclear weapons in the future. Any country with uranium enrichment or plutonium reprocessing can use those technologies to go into nuclear weapons with. And to address the earlier point about an unforeseen catastrophe at Fukushima, there are 3 senior Tokyo Electric executives who've just been indicted on criminal charges because they should have planned, they should have known that a tsunami could wipe that place out. And we have so many pathways to a similar disaster anywhere in the world, from natural disasters, whether it's tornadoes or ice storms. If you lose the off-site power grid and you lose the emergency diesel generators, you are plunged into a Fukushima catastrophic scenario. We even have many instances in the United States where the emergency diesel generators simply don't work when they're called upon. And there's currently a group of 7 NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission staffers, who've come forward publicly at huge risk to their careers, challenging the industry and the agency to address electrical safety system shortcomings at every single nuclear power plant in the United States. So the safety risks, the security risks, Indian Point near New York City, you'd think it would be secured this long after 9/11. The al-Qaeda attackers considered attacking it on 9/11. Well, we have independent filmmakers who are floating on the Hudson River for 5 hours before Indian Point responds to their presence, flying 500 feet above the plant in a plane, hovering in a helicopter for a half hour before being contacted. The security at US nuclear power plants is non-existent. Then you look at ISIS overrunning the Iraqi nuclear facility in Mosul 2 years ago, overrunning the Syrian nuclear plant that was bombed by Israel, digging for nuclear materials to make dirty bombs with. This is out of control.
Okay, this is out of control. Alina, and Kevin's making the point that he's not the only one to be worried. You're still convinced that you're right. Why?
I'm convinced that I'm right because I'd like to address some of these points that Kevin made. Security concerns, for example. There were actually tests conducted, a simulation conducted by the Electric Power Research Institute in the United States, which is a very well-known, very valued organization, simulating a Boeing 767 crashing into a nuclear power plant. And the containment is so robust, it's got 4 feet of concrete reinforced by steel, that the plane literally turns to dust. Actually, if I had the video, it would be great to see because it's a really powerful example. At U.S. nuclear power plants, just as anywhere else, you've got, I think, about 8,000 on staff just for security. The security is really immense at these plants. So all of these issues, they're issues that the industry understands, cybersecurity as well. In the past couple of years, for example, in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission required each licensee to create a cybersecurity protection plan and to make that plan even more stringent and robust than before. This is something we advise our clients on, creating these plans and creating these vast networks that will protect nuclear power plants. So we think that all of the factors are in place to make nuclear a clean, safe, and efficient source of energy.
We're out of time, but I want to squeeze an extra 20 seconds out of this because, Kevin, I see you shaking your head in disagreement. 20 seconds, please, sir.
Well, the journalist Ted Koppel just put out a major book about the vulnerability of the U.S. electric grid to cyber attack. So you've lost one source of safety systems. And if you lose the diesels, which sometimes don't even work when called upon, you are plunged into a Fukushima catastrophic situation at U.S. reactors.
Okay, Kevin and Lena, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, recapturing Mosul. Can Iraq claim back its second largest city? And in Picture This, why parts of Asia were plunged into darkness in the middle of the day. In June 2014, Daesh stormed across Iraq's western desert from Syria and seized its second largest city, Mosul. Now, nearly 2 years later, the pressure is building to retake Mosul. The question is, how? Daesh has entrenched itself in the city. Iraqi, US and Kurdish Peshmerga forces are preparing to fight the group. But will they be able to form a united front? And could the battle leave the city in complete ruins? Nicole Johnston filed this report from northern Iraq.
On the 16th of June 2014, Daesh charged into the most important city in northern Iraq, Mosul. It sent suicide bombers and fighters on the back of pickup trucks. The Iraqi army retreated and Daesh took the city without a fight. It seized more than $400 million from the central bank, destroyed priceless antiquities, and imposed its extreme interpretation of Islamic law. It's now estimated that Daesh has more than 5,000 fighters in the city. Now a military campaign to retake the city is gaining momentum. At Bashika camp in the Kurdistan regional government area of Iraq, a private Sunni army is being trained to fight. Most of these men are from near Mosul.
Mosul is my honor. The people there are my sister, my family. I will do everything to get my family back from Daesh.
The man behind this camp is the former governor of Mosul and multi-millionaire Atil Najafi. He lives in Erbil and is supporting the Sunni brigade. The Turkish army is here as well, training the fighters.
We need Turkey to be with us to deal also with the Daesh inside the city, and we know that the presence of Turkey would make some of the fighters, of Daesh fighters, would not like to fight Turkey.
3,500 men have been trained. They're waiting for orders to go to war. And they aren't the only ones. On a hilltop overlooking Iraq's Nineveh plains is a lone Peshmerga post. Kurdish forces are also preparing for a battle in Mosul. Around 40 men watch Daesh across the Tigris River. The village on the other side is under the group's control.
We need real support because we are in a war. Daesh has a country. They have weapons and equipment from the US and Iraq. We are at war with the state.
18 months ago, Daesh fighters crossed the river and took control of the village of Guer. It also seized the nearby town of Makmur. US airstrikes eventually pushed it back, and the Kurds were able to seize the armoured vehicles Daesh left behind. These originally belonged to the Iraqi army. Makmur is on a war footing. There are almost 10,000 Peshmerga fighters and soldiers from the Iraqi army here. The US has sent advisors and it's setting up an operations command centre, all to prepare for the offensive on Mosul. In Kurdish, Peshmerga means those who face death. And confronting Daesh in Mosul may just be that. Nicole Johnston, The Newsmakers, Makmur, Northern Iraq.
Well, joining me now to discuss the operation to retake Mosul is the former U.S. ambassador to Turkey and Iraq, James Jeffrey. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Jeffrey. Can the Iraqis take back Mosul? Is it realistic?
It is realistic that the coalition, including the United States and Iraqi forces, including local Sunni tribes and the Peshmerga together, at some point can take Mosul. The question is when and under which conditions.
It's an interesting case of optics as well, beyond just the capability to take it back. I remember speaking to an Iraqi general who said that the United States needs to provide as much air cover as possible and as much ammunition as possible, but in terms of the optics, it needs to be perceived as a fully Iraqi job, whether it's a combination of the army and the Peshmerga and the Sunni tribes, etc. And the US can't seem to have played too much of a big role. Is that a part of it as well?
That's a part of it, and that means it will be very difficult. Take a look at the much easier battle for Ramadi a few weeks ago. It was only one small unit, the counterterrorism force, that did most of the fighting, and that's a special force trained by us a long time ago. They're very good, but they're few in number. The regular Iraqi army cannot meet their capabilities, and there's not enough of them. So the question still remains, who is going to provide the ground forces?
Interesting that you mentioned Ramadi. 80% of it was destroyed in reclaiming it from Daesh. 2.5 million people live in Mosul, completely different situation. Despite all of that, what's the major lesson that you can take out, or you can draw out of the Ramadi operation and apply to Mosul?
One, you need highly capable combat troops. Turkey has them, the United States has them, other NATO countries have them. The Iraqis have them only in small numbers. Secondly, I'm not that worried about the destruction. That's a problem, but keeping Daesh around is an even bigger problem. And the United States went into Fallujah and did tremendous damage in 2004. I was there 6 months ago, and I saw how the people of Fallujah, the people of Iraq, were able to start rebuilding. We also have an example of Tikrit. There are ways to do this, and there are ways to use air power in those bombing attacks effectively.
We saw that famous video of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It's basically the only video we have of him. And for all intents and purposes, it was from Mosul. He was giving a Friday sermon in one of the mosques there in Mosul. Does that emphasize how important Mosul is to Daesh? And by actually retaking it, does that sort of cut off the head of the snake?
Absolutely to both. But the important thing is, this is not another Al-Qaeda. This is a movement, a quasi-state, that is bankrupting the Kurds in the north, Baghdad in the south. It is creating and adding to the tension from the Syrian civil war, the problems that Turkey has, PKK, Turkey, Russia. All of these problems flow from or are made reinforced by Daesh, which is also capable, as everybody in Turkey knows, of launching terrorist attacks, terrible ones, in Turkey, in America, in Paris. And so there are many reasons why we have to take it down. The key city for that is Mosul.
One of the side effects we saw of retaking Ramadi and other operations against ISIS throughout Iraq was Shia militias rampaging their way through, killing many Sunnis for real or perceived support of Daesh. Are you worried about Shia militias unleashed on Sunnis who might have nothing to do with ISIS?
Everybody is worried about that, but A, that was not a factor in Ramadi. They weren't involved in that fight. And even in Tikrit, and I've talked to many Sunni Arabs from that province, Saladin, all in all, they behaved fairly well. But still, it's a problem. But here's, for your viewers and listeners, the underlying problem. There's 1,000 reasons why we don't do things. And that's why the most powerful coalition the Middle East has seen in 30 years has not been able to take down a force of some 20,000 people spread out over the size of a third of Turkey, because we keep on worrying about all of these little issues. These issues can be fixed. That's what big countries do.
Ambassador James Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us. It's been fascinating talking to you. In today's Picture This, millions of people across Asia gathered to witness a solar eclipse where parts of the continent were plunged into complete darkness. let's take a look at some of the striking images captured of the total solar eclipse. Today's newsmaker has been nuclear power. It was once billed as the future of clean, reliable energy. But now, more than half a century after the first nuclear reactor came online, Europe and the US are decommissioning some of their older plants. Japan, too, faced with strong public opposition in the wake of the Fukushima crisis, is also closing plants. But while nuclear power may be at a crossroads, it is by no means at the end of the road. China plans to triple its nuclear power capacity by 2020, and around the world, at least 70 nuclear reactors are under construction. But will nuclear power ever be able to overcome its PR problem and truly answer our future energy needs? Or should it be relegated to the history books? You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.